All right. Welcome to the River Rain Show. It's been a while, and I'm excited to revive the podcast. And we have a special guest today, and we're going to talk all about comebacks. Today, I have Michael Mapes, who is a highly sought after coach, entrepreneur, and author of a groundbreaking book, The Conscious Entrepreneur's Guide to Creating Wealth. With a deep understanding of the interconnectedness between personal growth, conscious business practices, and financial success, Michael has helped numerous individuals tap into their true potential and build thriving businesses aligned with their values. His expertise lies in empowering entrepreneurs to create abundance while staying true to their purpose and making positive impact in the world. Through this insightful coaching, transformative workshops, and inspiring writings, Michael continues to guide individuals towards a path of growing their business and living their mission. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. It's maybe we'll tell the audience just a couple of minutes of how we know each other. Do you want to do the honors?
Yeah, I do. Well, we've known each other. It's been a minute now, actually, which
10 years, 11
yeah.
years. Yeah.
But yeah, we first I don't remember exactly how we very first connected. But we somehow got in contact with one another because you were looking to grow your business and I was coaching conscious entrepreneurs and people were selling spiritual services. And I had started my first business doing intuitive readings and psychic readings for people and teaching intuition. And so we had that connection. And so we connected that way. And then you joined one of my programs. We worked together there. I think we did a VIP day together or something like that somewhere along the way and kind of did a deep dive into your programs and what you were looking to create. And yeah, we've kind of, and then time passed and I have kind of monitored your progress from a little bit of a distance now, but I've been so impressed with it. And
well, thank you.
Yeah. And then we reconnected just a few weeks ago now, I think, right?
Yep. Yeah,
as
it's
I've been
so
putting myself
funny.
back out there. And
it's so funny how the universe puts us back like in and out in waves in each other's lives like that. But I'll say like yours was the one and only coaching program I have ever paid for in my life.
Thank you.
I usually resist these programs, and there was something about you and yours because at the time you were offering it geared towards, I think you said even spiritual entrepreneurs, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought, okay, finally somebody's going to get the complexities of being in these two very different worlds. And the training, I mean, honestly, some of the stuff that you've said to this day, it's still in my head and I still haven't done it because I'm not there yet. Like you put so much into your program, put so much work into it.
Yeah, and I had come to that kind of connection between spirituality and consciousness and business because I had been, like I said, I started my first business doing readings for people at 19. I had a death in my family and I sort of had a spirit. I mean, I had a lot of psychic experiences my whole life, including telling my preschool teacher I was psychic when I was 5.
Oh, wow.
But I had a death in the family and I kind of had this whole spiritual experience around that kind of led me to feel like I need to put this out there, which was so crazy to me at the time because like people in my family are like lawyers and doctors and professors and like this is what I was thinking that I would be doing. And so it was really so bizarre. But through that whole process and over the years, and I started going to these different metaphysical fairs and psychic fairs and things, I would meet these people, Catherine, who I mean, they would be like curing cancer or something. You know what I mean? Like they would be like totally changing people's. I mean,
with
like
a selenite wand, Mary.
Yes, I mean it was so crazy. And then and they would have 50 years of experience, or they would have 20 certifications, but they could not get 5 people into their workshop. And I was so and I could, for whatever reason. I've always I think because I started with so little pressure. I mean, I never expected what I was doing to work, and I literally didn't care in any way if it did, because I just felt like if this doesn't work, I'll just go back to my plan of being a lawyer, and that will be fine. And even when I started, I mean, I did 100 readings for free to prove to myself that there was nothing to giving readings and nothing to what I was doing. So for me, I didn't have that kind of pressure around it because I just thought,
Mm-hmm.
well, if this doesn't work, it doesn't work. And then in the beginning, I mean, I was in college, so I didn't have like the financial pressure to be making all this money. Like I didn't have a family, I didn't have a house payment, I didn't have car, you know, I didn't have all these things. And so it just gave me, but of course, you know, so I had this kind of basic clients that I was able to establish, and I've always been good at kind of figuring out how to say things and how to message things,
Mm-hmm.
and listening to people. I mean, I was so everything I've ever done has been a result of other people asking me to do this thing, you know, and so that is how I kind of first was like even got into that, because I thought, oh my god, I have to help these people, because it's like if if these people don't figure it out, then how many people are not gonna like get this help, you know what I mean? And I think about like in recent years I've read a lot about Van Gogh, and I've read a lot of Van Gogh's letters and different things, but Van Gogh's sister-in-law, whose name is totally flying out of my head right now, but it will come to me at some point, but who was married to his brother Theo, is the whole reason that we know about Van Gogh, because Van Gogh
Huh.
died, and then 6 months or a year later, or something like that, his brother died. And then here she is left with his child and all this artwork. But she shared their vision of this, and she knew that this art was like so valuable and so beautiful and so innovative. And she had learned a little bit about the art world from her husband and how to sell things. Now, this is like, you know, in the like late 18, or what is this, 1800s or something, you know, and it's like women were not like selling art, you know what I mean?
No.
Certainly not like single women with children at this
Yeah.
point, but there was something so strong in her that said, I need to, that the world needs this. And so she was like very strategic about it, right? There's all of these famous art critics, right, who are saying like this woman is overly sentimental, this woman has absolutely no idea what she's talking about. And of course nobody knows any of those art critics names, and everybody knows Vincent van Gogh's name. And it's like I think about, okay, if he hadn't had that, like we wouldn't know anything about like his artwork. And I think that's a
Wow.
kind of my clarion call to like entrepreneurs, like especially conscious entrepreneurs. It's like we need you, and we need your gifts, and more importantly, like your clients need you. And like if you don't figure out, like I don't want, there's so many people that I'm like, oh my gosh, like don't let your gifts, don't let your art, your music, your songs, your poems, your whatever it is, your intuitive reading, your healing service, your, you know, Reiki workshop, like don't let it just end up like in the graveyard, you know,
Yeah.
where nobody can benefit from it. Nobody will know about it.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And so many people either struggle with two things, right? Like imposter syndrome stops them, or like you said, you don't know enough about marketing or how to place yourself or even where to begin. So you get four people showing up and you're like, great, nobody cares. And you
Yes.
capitulate. Or then you start to walk into the whole world of all these platforms and all these tools, and you are absolutely inundated and flooded. And then it's like it's hard work to define, to learn them, choose something. And what I've learned the hard way now is like it's really like you've got to be centered in yourself before you can even start any of that stuff, because people are going to sense it if you're scattered and scrambled all over platforms for nothing and going, please come to my thing. I mean,
Yes.
yeah.
I
And
think
it
that
took me so long to realize I just got to center.
yes, and that you can try things to figure it out. I mean, I think marketers have kind of been very guilty of like promoting their work as if it's some kind of extremely complicated spellcraft that only they can do or something, and that if you don't have, you know, this very like this tome and this book to translate the tome, and then there's like you cannot penetrate. But actually no, marketing is not rocket science at all. It's like we're going to find some people and tell them about this thing that we do, and then if they don't like it or whatever, we're either going to adjust the thing that we do, or we're going to find another group of people, or we're going to try to tell them about it in a slightly different way. And I
Yeah.
think that one of the things that's like, I mean, I grew up with a single mother, and one of the things that I remember so clearly from my childhood was something would go wrong, she'd figure it out, you know, and it's like something wouldn't work, and then she would figure it out. But the thing is, like, when you're figuring something out, like, you have to try a lot of things, especially if you don't have a lot of resources. And so she
Mhm.
would try something, it wouldn't work. She would try something else. She would try something else. I think that that has stayed with me, and because that is like, that can really truly be some of the fun of this stuff, is like you get to try it and figure it out. Like there's never been a you before. Okay, so thus there's never been a like your business before, like at this exact point in time with your exact unique gifts, talents, and abilities. So like you get to try out these different things and then incorporate the feedback that you want to, and discard some of the feedback that's maybe not as useful to you or whatever. And like you said, when you kind of combine that with like just allowing that process to happen and allowing it to kind of be centered within you, because it's like it's not, business success is no reflection on you as a like as your value as a human being or something, right? It's like it's not that kind of, it's not, even though it can feel very personal and these can feel, acutely like, upsetting or exciting or whatever. But I think it's like being able to kind of test out these things and try these things. And with regards to the platforms, and I just had made a TikTok about this the other day about how do you, because like there really are so many different, there are really so many different options. And I think I mean, to me, you don't have to worry so much about being on every platform or really being on like any platform. There are some people who have totally successful businesses. They're not on any social media platform at all. And I think figuring out,
go ahead.
out which ones
How do you
are,
like TikTok as a platform?
it seems to be working for me.
Yeah. I like them.
It's interesting because I like there's something about brevity and being concise. Like there's this very funny Nora Ephron clip at some Meryl Streep awards ceremony or whatever, in which she's making a toast to Meryl Streep. And it's like 2.5 minutes, and it's like the most hysterical, funny, substantive, like, and I think, oh my God, that's really hard. It's really hard to show up and be extremely funny for like 2 minutes. But if you can do it, there's something very useful about it. Now, on the other hand, though, I mean, I am a total, I like depth and I like, detail. And so it's interesting because for me, it's like two sides. Like I have both of those kind of things. Like I love conversations like this where there's not that pressure to say everything that you want to say in 2 minutes. And where you can definitely dive deeper. But I think, I mean, one of the things to me about so much of what I see, and I especially about TikTok, is just like I am just blown away. Like I hope my information is useful to people and stuff on there, but I am so blown away by especially some of these young people, like just the creativity that goes in the humor and the way that some of it is so subversive and transgressive and challenging a lot of these kind of deeply kind of held beliefs that we have as a culture. And I mean, I think there's something kind of so liberating and encouraging about that. And I'll just say quickly that I think, on the one hand, people are like, everything is changing so fast in business, everything is changing so fast in marketing, everything is changing so fast in the world. And it's like, well, yes, okay. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, we used to have television ads and now we have video or whatever on YouTube. We used to have big billboards and now we've got like graphics. Like we still have our eyes and like our senses are not changing as fast as maybe the technology is changing. And so like, if you think about it, it's like, what is it's like if you're communicating useful value in a way that is also useful to people, then like that will work, and that's timeless. Like there are principles in business, like let's find the group of people that we want to talk to, find the unique thing that they need, offer that to them in a way that is like unique and pleasing for like, those are kind of the deeper questions that aren't going to change whether there's 1,000 platforms or, no platforms.
Yeah. And are you still at this time doing any of your readings or intuitive work, or you're purely coaching?
Yep, purely coaching. I mean, I used to call myself an intuitive business coach, and I would still be totally comfortable with that label. Although I don't really use it at the moment. It's so
well, not officially as your title, but I'm sure you're using it.
Yeah, it just became at a point for me. So, well, it was kind of twofold. It was like, number one, I created a program called Mastering Your Psychic Abilities in 6 weeks, which I'll re-release at some point, which was really all my best thinking about intuition, because one of I think, so that was the first thing that kind of was like my transition. but then I just started to see that working through that with people that I had trained, there were so many other great training programs, and there were just so many other great intuitives and psychics out there that I just felt like, okay, it's time to just pass the torch. Like there's so many fantastic people. And I mean, I had done a lot of readings. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of readings over the years
Yeah.
and on the radio. So, I mean, I had had a lot of private clients, and I had been listed up as early days of the internet on this website called Medium Channel, which was like the best psychic list or something. So I really had quite a few clients, and I just felt like there was just kind of a new generation of people. I don't mean like necessarily younger by any means, but
Yeah.
there were just so many great people out there doing that I felt like, okay, it's time for me to evolve. Because when I started, it was not like that. Like we were talking about Sylvia Brown before we started recording, and like that was kind of it. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
you might see something about like John Edward every now and again. I mean,
True.
and then you were kind of like back to Edgar Casey, you know, and like then you were back to whatever, you know, like spiritualism in the 1800s. I mean, there was not like a deep well of these people doing it. And I think for me, it just at some point became so integrated into
Yeah.
what I was doing. I mean, but yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the powerful thing I think about an intuitive reading, and what I hope I bring to my coaching, is there's such a powerful having someone else make observations about you, and having
Yeah.
somebody, you know, whether those observations are like coming from a very like well-trained therapist, or whether those observations are coming from like someone with an intuitive perspective, and pull those things out, having a space for that, and a space to just like be able to think about yourself and consider yourself, and have somebody else be totally committed to thinking about you and
Yeah.
offering you insight about you. There is something like there is a magic and like an
Yeah.
accelerated force of transformation that
Yes.
happens in that space. And so I hope that that's
Totally.
the element I still bring to it, you know, in my
Oh, I'm
coaching.
sure you still bring a lot of insight, like you said. I think it's interesting what you bring up about, passing the torch and moving on. So it sort of leads me also to a question I'm sure is on a lot of you must get from a lot of people is, I've seen some of your TikToks and talking about not worrying, like you said, about being on every platform or about even being on a platform at all, or not worrying about going viral. Like you are allowed to sort of find your niche and it can still work. Because
Yes.
we come from, like we said, there was Sylvia Brown and John Edward, and that was it. And then Hay House began and it expands slightly, but it still felt like there's a few people in this echelon and that's it. And so it's scary to sort of go, you mean I could just like make like purple water bottles and I could still survive and make a living if that's my business? Or you know what I
Yes.
mean? Like, so if you could
Yes.
talk to that about being comfortable in a niche, or how niche can we be and still succeed?
Yeah, there's that saying, you know, the riches are in the niches. And you know, I think what's interesting is, you know, it's there are certain businesses that don't have it's not as important to necessarily have a super specific niche, because maybe the thing that they're doing is a more innovative thing, or but even within that there will still be niched marketing programs. I mean, because
Mm-hmm.
the whole point of marketing is that it has to be, it's directed towards someone, right? And it appeals to a certain kind of person. Like even something like, you know, peanut butter, there are peanut butter ads to kids. There are peanut butter ads that are meant to appeal to, and there are different kinds of peanut butter, right? For different kinds of people, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's kind of like finding your ideal client market, or finding your niche. For most of us is going to be such an important thing. So all those kind of caveats aside, but it's going to be such an important thing, because it's there's more resonance in, and more likelihood to get a result in sort of a specific and magnetic marketing message. And it's hard to write that if you're writing that to like absolutely everyone, you know what I mean? And again, I think you see this in something like the success of even like the Marvel comic movies or whatever, which if I never see another one of them, it will be totally too soon. I am absolutely not the target market for superhero movies. But that said, it's like it has captured, it's like that is marketed to a very specific kind of group of people, you know what I mean? And it's like a marketing that's extremely resonant with them. So I think kind of finding that group of people becomes sort of so important, especially for those of us who are not Marvel or Coke or Microsoft or Martha Stewart or Oprah, because we don't have budgets to be able to necessarily market to the masses. Like if you look at something like Coca-Cola, that's much more dependent on something like brand marketing, right? Where it's got these commercials that it's marketing to, these polar bears and Christmas commercials that it's marketing to 5-year-olds so that they'll choose Coke over Pepsi. And then when we're 25 and 35 and I see one of those commercials and then I'm buying Coke because I have nostalgia, it's like it's much more, or something like Nike, those are much more dependent on something like brand marketing. But the thing about that is that you need tons and tons and tons of money to be able to create a brand like that, and then more importantly to actually be able to market it in such a way that it would have that effect. For most of my clients and most of us who are like service-based professionals, or we've got like an Etsy shop or something like that, finding that niche is going to be so much more important, because what allows you to get clients when you're not a Coke or a Microsoft or something is highly tailored, highly personalized messaging. Like part of why I was able to transition so easily from doing readings to people into these conscious entrepreneurs was because I was so immersed in that world. I mean, that was my world, that struggle of how am I going to get this out there? How am I going to, deal with this feeling that I have all this potential that I'm not using? How am I going to talk to people about this thing that's really weird and that they think is Miss Cleo? You know what I mean? And like that.
Hello, caller. Yeah.
I cannot tell you the amount of times I got asked if I was Miss Cleo.
God.
Do you know what I mean? And how am I going to kind of demystify? Like, those were my struggles. So I was so immersed in that. So then when I went to market to those people, it was such like I was again chatting with myself, right? These were the issues I had. And so it's like one of the ways to figure this out for yourself is to think about where were you 2 steps ago, or where were you 5 steps ago? And what were you dealing with? Because we tend to teach, those things that we learned just a little bit ago, and like that's all you need to be. You only need to be 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of your ideal client, right? And so it's like when I started out coaching business, I wasn't making 6 figures yet or anything like that, but I was making more money than most of the people that I was coaching. So okay, I couldn't help them necessarily get to 6 figures, but I could help them get their next 5 clients, and I could help them get the next 100 people on their email list, and I could help them get their next 50 social media followers, and I could help them get a client from a networking meeting. So it's like you can start to think about where you were a couple of steps ago, and then just like a couple quick things about like your ideal clients. You have to be able to find them, right? So you if you can't like locate them yet, or they don't like gather in any place, they don't read any common magazine, then it's probably not going to work. They have to be able to afford you. So you have to pick some kind of client base that actually has money. Or if you have a client base, like I know for some of my clients, it's like they're working with a client base like people who are houseless or people who are food insecure. Okay, so their clients, like even though those are the people they're serving, those are not exactly their clients. Their clients are the sponsors, or the clients are the way that they're getting money. If you're working with children, your clients are the parents in most cases, because those are the people who are deciding what to spend money on. So a lot of your marketing is probably going to be to them. So, those are some things that you can kind of think about. But yeah, definitely being able to find your niche is probably a way to accelerate getting clients.
I was sort of amazed during the pandemic how much that shifted things. I'll ask you about for you as well, but for me, I was just amazed. Like a couple of demographics that used to constantly come to me just disappeared when they could no longer see me in person. And I was just sort of left dumbfounded, but honestly, in a good way, because one demographic was people escaping dangerous relationships. And as much as I do, and I'm aware of a lot of stuff about trauma and counseling, I was always put in this, I don't know, I was always sort of cornered between the social worker side that they needed, but I wanted a reading. And the denial of what they were hoping for in a reading. It's like, I'm not going to tell you this person is going to magically change. You need a lawyer or whatever. And then they get angry. And I was like, oh my God, I was so stressed out. And I had so many of those. And the other was the skeptics. Oh, it
Yes.
doesn't work unless I touch the cards or unless I'm sitting right with you. I'm like, no, don't even need to see you.
I used
And
to say, but when I would do readings and people would, like I would get that kind of needy client who would ask me the same question like many times in a row, So, and I used to say, I'm not in the habit of repeating myself. So I used to have these ways to kind of move those people on.
yeah. And I mean, I wonder how the pandemic shifted your business. Did you see a shift in who came and how, and has it flipped back again?
Well,
Like,
what's so interesting, we just get into my personal history, is I wasn't doing a lot of business during the pandemic
okay.
because I was addicted to drugs. And
Okay.
just
Wow.
just to, put it right out there. But
Yeah. I'm
and
happy
I
you're
I
okay now.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've been sober for 10 months now or something, I
Good for
think,
you.
which feels really good.
Yeah.
Actually, right before the pandemic, I had a traumatic experience. I was sexually assaulted, and
Oh
so
no.
drugs
Oh,
went from being a problem for me to I will never not have these. That was like in my mind, I just felt this switch flip. I'm like, I will never not have these. I'll not have anything else before. And
wow.
and then the pandemic happened. So it's like I was so, especially at the beginning of it, dissociated and
Yeah.
split off into my own. I can't even like really describe the level of just of numbness and
Out of
despair.
body.
Yeah. And so,
Yeah.
and then I'm like, oh my God, the whole world is falling down around me at the same time.
Yeah.
But I will say, so, and we could talk more about that. I know we're going to get on the
Yeah.
subject of comebacks and things like that. But um, what I noticed now being back, you know what I mean, is I'm like, I said this to my brother the other day, who's 14 years younger than me and a computer programmer and whatever, and much more hip to what's going on. But I said, I was like, my God, there are a lot of people on the internet. Like, I thought there were a lot of people on the internet before, because I had a lot of clients that were all over the country and all over the world and stuff. And even when I was doing readings, I would do these internet radio shows. I mean, so I was not like a stranger to the internet, but it's like coming back to it now is it's just different. Like it's
Yeah.
exciting because it's like there is much more of what I would call like a conversation that is
Mm.
happening online. I don't, I know sometimes it's shallow, but like there's a level of sort of engagement and involvement that when I was, really going, 5 or 6 years ago, I don't think was there. And I think has something to do for sure with the pandemic and people just
Yeah.
being home. And I'm excited about that from the aspect of what I hope it leads to is that we start to think about ways to use these tools to like actually connect more and actually further democratic ends. And
Yeah.
and I don't only mean like democratic in terms of like politics, although I do, but I just also mean that in terms of just community and public participation and public engagement around things. One of the things, that I think is so important is just this sense of like, this is going to sound so old fashioned, but just this sense of neighborliness and
Mm-hmm.
this sense of feeling like you're part of a neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think sometimes it's like, okay, the internet or some way has taken us away from that. It's taken us away to the person next door. It's taken us away from the church, down the street or whatever it is. But actually, what it does is just open up new avenues for that kind of connection. I mean, I'm so interested in some of the next wave of businesses that I hope develop out of the conscious entrepreneur community, which are not just like, here's how to grow your business and here's how to lose weight and here's how to get a
Yeah.
relationship, although those are all like fantastic things and I have clients who work in all of them. But I'm interested in some of these next level of things like, you know like how are we going to, like how can we use this to connect with elderly people who
Mm.
don't who have a lot of wisdom and who are great conversationalists and have so much to contribute. It's like, but and what are the ways that perhaps somebody could stay in their home longer if they have somebody who can check in on them once or twice a week? It's like these are the kinds of things that I'm hopeful that will open up some of these new business models and these new ways of looking at things, because I'm not a person who is pessimistic about young people at all, and I'm not a person who's pessimistic about old people. And it seems like there is so much like generational rage. But as far as I
Mm.
see it, I'm like, okay, young people and old people are the only people who seem to know anything in my world, and we don't spend any time listening to those people at all. So I'm interested for the way that it can kind of bridge the gap and kind of bring us back to the human, and I think there's so much possibility there as well. And I would say that to anybody who, it's like, it's like, I know it can feel like, and even for me, it can feel like, oh my God, it's so saturated. Who am I? What do I have to say? But I think it's like, those questions don't have to be disempowerments. Like, who am I is a very empowering question. And what do I have to say is a deeply empowering question, right? But we
Hmm.
tend to take it to this imposter syndrome place and this kind of degradation, this place of degradation, rather than like, okay, who am I? Let me think about that for 20 minutes a day. What do I have to say?
Yeah.
Let me give that some journaling for an hour today. And then how can that translate into these businesses? Because we have the technology to make, like, it's
Yeah.
so easy and accessible in some senses, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that the ideas that we've had are the only ideas that we should continue to use.
Yeah, there was a really great uh lesson that I learned on TikTok as well. I was obsessed with TikTok and it helped me through. And it was very niche because I'd start following and then the algorithm sends you more of the thing you love. I made a friend in Scotland that I ended up seeing, and we're still friends. And we met because we were both following the same Scottish guy. And this guy's quite an inspiring story because he normally his work was to travel all over to do right to play or something or sports stuff. So what? But while he was locked down, he started teaching Gaelic and baking Scottish stuff.
Oh
And
my gosh.
his husband was a cinematographer, filmmaker, and their storytelling was out of this world. Them and their little
Yes.
Scotty dogs in the boat on the way to the Isle of Lewis. And I'm like, oh my God. And all this to say, so many people followed him because they just loved his ability to let us into his life and his story. And now he's got books and he's on tours and with the BBC and he's all over North America. And it's inspiring, but I also met a friend because I was on his little wave.
Yes.
So it's just that really awakened me, the whole like storytelling and letting people know your story, because that is a huge
Yes.
that's a huge switch in our lifetime. It used to be, here's my product, you don't know me,
Yes.
I'm just my service, here's my product and my service, you don't need to, why do you want to know why if I have a dog or not? And now it's like flipped on its head, people want to know your story, and it's still not obvious to a lot of people how to do that, do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. And I think, let me just say one quick thing about what you said, which is that I think in marketing, it's like sometimes we fall prey to this like data fallacy, right? Which is like, this is what works and this is what their data is data on. But the thing about it is like, and that's a useful thing for all kinds of different things and analytics and whatever. But it's like, data is only what has existed so far, right? It's like you can't measure something that hasn't existed yet. And
Yeah.
so part of what our job is as marketers and as conscious entrepreneurs is to not only look at like what's working, but to start to imagine the future thing that will work. And sometimes that sounds really bizarre. It's like I think about the movie Shape of Water, which I love and which won an Academy Award and all this stuff. And it's like if you're telling like if you're telling somebody about this movie, like it's gonna sound so horrible. You're like, okay, it's set in like the 1950s, and it's a love story between like a lizard and this maid and then there's a bunch of like artsy water stuff, and there's this kind of side plot with this gay guy in a pie shop. It's like that sounds like it would be the stupidest thing in the abstract to watch, right? And yet in the particular but in the actual creation of it, it's like it can sound very good. It's like if you ask people like, okay, would you vote for a first term senator with the middle name Hussein for president? Like they're going to say no, right? But then in the specifics of Barack Obama, it's like, and there's no data saying that. The data says no, that couldn't happen, no, that wouldn't work, whatever. But in fact, in the specifics of it, it can absolutely work. And so I just would like totally encourage people. It's like there is plenty of space for new things and plenty of ways to be creative. Even what you talked about, that fusion between baking and their personal story and cinematography, like that's another way to get at innovative and interesting ideas, is to think about what things can be combined from different domains, or what kind of, form can be taken over into the content of something else, and to sort of play with it. I think with regards to storytelling, I do think it's so important. I think, and for me, when I look at this, and I write about this in my book, I actually, in the Conscious Entrepreneur's Guide to Creating Wealth, I have a whole chapter on storytelling, and I kind of outline 3 different methods, or kind of narrative methodologies, kind of narrative frameworks that you can sort of pick to tell your story. Of course, there are many, many, many more than 3, but these are kind of, and one of them is like a hero's journey sort of a story, and one of them is kind of like an expertise kind of model. But there's different ways you can do it. I think from a business standpoint, it's like 2 things. Number one is I really, and I think I talked about this in one of my TikTok videos, but this content is king mentality. I'm so over it. It's like Bill Gates said this, I think in 1990 or something like that, so long ago. I mean, first off, it was said by a man. It is so misogynistic, because it's just like more, 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 more. It's like bigger, better, faster, stronger. And it makes sense for a company like Microsoft that would be the thing that they would do, because they have more money than God, and they can make more blog posts than any of us. But I think that if you're not Microsoft, again, if you're not Oprah, if you don't have 1,000 content writers on Chat GPT day and night publishing out all of these kind of posts and articles, and again, not to say there's anything wrong with it, but trying to mirror that, it's like that's probably not your strength, and probably not your advantage. I think so much of our strength and our advantage is in it being able to create much more personalized content, and you don't have to produce it as often, right? It's like part of what it's like attention, getting people's attention or whatever by like screaming in their face is like one way to do things, and that again, that is an effective way if you have a ton of money to get in everybody's face constantly. But if you don't, there's something called like seduction, you know what I mean, and like giving people like a little bit and then giving them, it's like I always think, like, if those people where it's like you hear them speak somewhere, you hear them say something, like they don't give you their website, but you like are getting their name to like go find their Twitter and go find their website and read everything that they've written on New York. It's like that's what you want to kind of tap into. You want to try to create that so like people will feel like, oh my God, I need to like learn more. Plus, we do know from like some of the data, it's like if you write more generic headlines on social media, you will get more click-throughs. But if you write more personalized and specific headlines, you will get more people. You'll get less people overall who click through, but the people who click through will read much more of the article and are much more likely to become clients. And I think there's this misnomer, and you can waste a lot of money and a lot of time trying to get likes, shares, follows, and clicks rather than customers. It's like I'd rather have no shares on something but 5 customers than 500 shares on something and no customers. And so I think it's like, and a lot of times it's kind of like not everybody is the kind of person to like something publicly or comment on something publicly. Like certain target markets and stuff are not, there's all kinds of reasons that they may not want to do anything publicly, but they might be incredibly motivated to click through and to actually read read the content that you're producing, read the articles you're producing, listen to the podcasts. And so it's like an example of this is like when Bernie Sanders and Hill was running against Hillary Clinton for president, and like they would be like, oh my God, how could Hillary Clinton win that primary? Bernie Sanders had 40,000 people at a rally. It's like, yeah, but there's too many people in this state, and a lot of them didn't have time to go to a rally or whatever. You know what I mean? And it's like it's like it's not to say that's not a measure of something for his campaign, but it's not. It's like it's not an indicator ultimately of success. And so sometimes like that front stage that we're seeing can obscure the actual metric that we are that we're looking for. And I do think, with regards to your personal story and all that, it's finding a way that's going to make sense and connect with your audience. It's like it's not vomiting out your energy and everything about yourself to everybody at all times. You know what I mean? Like,
what do you think works in terms of our field, like spiritual, intuitive healing? what do you see working well in this particular field right now versus politics and vacuum
Yeah.
cleaners and stuff?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
exactly. I was going to be the psychic vacuum cleaner. Um, I think part of that is staying connected to your own truth and your own intuition, and like,
Yeah.
and figuring out, like, for me, I'm very comfortable talking about drug addiction. I'm very comfortable talking about sexual assault. I'm very comfortable talking about, being gay. Like, those are things, but that may or may not be absolutely authentic for everyone. I mean, I would
Mm-hmm.
say you don't, and there are certain things that are in my life that I absolutely wouldn't talk about. You know what I mean? And so I think so much of that is staying connected to your center, and like, what's your intention, like, behind it? So much of, like, anything that I share, my intention behind it is because I think it might be useful or helpful to somebody who hears it. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I think other things that are just kind of personally interesting to me or whatever, then I think would not be as authentic for me to share. So I think it's that. I think it's staying connected to your truth, and using that as your filter. And I think the worst thing to do is to look at what or how someone else is, like, doing it, and then feel that that's the way that that you need to do it. Because
Yeah.
I think it's very fraught. Like, I think it can be very fraught. Like, certain people sharing things about their kids, where it's like, that's on the internet forever now, with someone who can't really consent to doing it. And then there's
Mm-hmm.
other situations where you feel like, okay, that's probably, like, totally fine or whatever. So I think it's that. I think it's staying connected to your truth and your story. And I also think that it's about recognizing your value and realizing that the things that you have that are valuable to people, like, your journey has worth. The things that you've lived through has value, that and the experiences that you've experienced, have there's a utility in that, and a utility in, talking about that with other people. And I think so. I think it's that. I think it has to be, authentic. I think you have to stay connected to kind of your internal sieve about what to put out there, and what not to put out there. And I think you have to look at it and go, okay, does this have some potential value for someone, right? And sometimes you just put it out there and you say, I wonder if this has value. Let me see if anyone resonates with it. And I think too, just kind of from, like, a more marketing standpoint, I think you want to do, like, a mix of different things, right? So I think you want to, it's like, you want to educate and inform, you want to inspire, and you want to entertain. And I think you can kind of come up with, like, whatever little percentage of that is sort of the best, like, for your business. Like, for me, I probably want to be, 50-60% educating, 20-30% inspiring, and 10% entertaining. So you can think about, like, so it's fine to post, like, a meme every now and again, or it's fine to post, like, a candid or whatever photo of you every now and again. It's fine to post a family something every now and again. That's entertaining for your audience. That humanizes your audience. That lets them know that you're relatable and all these things. But then again, it's like, I'm not going to have 70% of my stuff be selfies of me, or pictures with my friends. So I think it's kind of like
Yeah.
that.
So, on the subject of comebacks, then,
Yes.
um, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yours, since you went through obviously a harrowing time. How'd you get from that to being back on TikTok and back in business?
Yeah. Well, I'm very lucky.
Mm.
I feel that I am, because it was
Mm-hmm.
touch and go for a while. And
Mm.
I was thinking about this as I was kind of walking the last couple of days, because I knew we were gonna talk about it. And I think the first thing for me, like, the first moment or whatever, like, well, let me say first, kind of conceptually, that the thing that helps me a lot is knowing that that doesn't have to be the end of my story, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
I started to tell myself at a certain point, like, if I can just last on a little bit longer, if I can just hang on a little bit longer, if I can just get through another 5 minutes or another 20 minutes, then all this stuff that I've been through is not a defining part of my story. It's a chapter in my story, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
like, it's the moment when I confront the dragon, but there might
Yeah.
be a moment when I slay the dragon. And I think that's
Yeah.
why fairy tales and stuff are so important, right? Because it, like, lets us know that, like, whatever, the darkness doesn't have to be the end of the story. So I started to think about the fact that if I can hang on a little bit more, and if I can last on a little bit more, and if I can tolerate a little bit more uncertainty, and if I can find a little bit more hope, then what I've been through will just be all that much better as a part of my story, right?
Mm.
And it'll just be like something that I lived through rather than something that came to define me, and something that overcame me. And so I started to think about that, because what that did for me was start to disconnect what had happened and some of the choices that I had made and who I was. Uh, because it's like, if there's going to be another chapter, right, then who I am is not these failures. Who I am is not these struggles. These are just something that I've lived through. These are just something that have taught me, right?
Yes.
Something. These are just something that I've experienced. So I started to sort of disconnect those two thoughts, because for me, those two things were so intimately connected. Like, a business success was not a business success. It was my success as a person. And a business
Mm-hmm.
failure was not a business failure. It was my failure as a person, right? And
Yeah.
my getting a divorce was not like a relationship failure. It was, I am a failure. And so I had to start to disconnect like who I am from what has happened to me and from some of the choices that I've made. Because
Yeah.
then it started to be a more empowering space to think about, what do I want to do next? The moment for me that when I was like, okay, I'm going to change, because I had done drugs far longer than it was fun to do drugs. Like, it loses. I mean, drugs are a great short-term solution, not such a great long-term solution in my experience. Very good for helping me cope with something for a minute, then very maladaptive and very bad very fast. And so the moment that came for me, because I had in my mind for months, I need to quit this. This is not fun. But I just didn't really. There was no inner real oomph to change. It was like, I don't like this, and I kind of want this to be different, but I don't really want to be any different yet. And then I got COVID. Um,
Oh.
and even though I was vaccinated and boosted and all of this stuff, I mean, it
Mm.
was the craziest thing. I mean, it was one of the most psychic moments I've like ever had. I just like started to get this headache, and I'm like, I have COVID. And then
Oh, wow.
I
Huh.
was just totally, I mean, it was like so absolute crystal clear. I just, something in me just knew. And the thing is, I hadn't been listening to that inner voice all that much. And so I went and I took a test, and I thought, even though I was like, I mean, I didn't know, even though I was vaccinated and stuff, like, I didn't know what was going to happen. I had a friend who got extremely, extremely sick by it, like, with it. And I had witnessed that before, like 6 months before that in my house. Like, he was in so much pain. It took three of us to carry him downstairs. I mean, it was like he was fine, and then that. And
Mm.
so I had this thing in my mind of like, oh my God, I could die. You know what I mean? And I was like, I don't want to die being addicted to drugs. I don't want to die with this being the end of my story, right? And all of a sudden, that urge overwhelmed anything. It overwhelmed being worried about feeling ashamed. It
Mm.
overwhelmed being too scared to ask for help. It overwhelmed,
Mm.
I had, of course, lied to my family. They thought I was sober when I wasn't. It overwhelmed any fear of retribution or punishment from them. And so I
Mm.
just stopped doing drugs. I mean, I stopped doing
Wow.
drugs. I
So
was
it was
just,
like an epiphany.
yes,
Wow.
definitely. And then I was very sick for a week, and after that, I just put it down. Um, and
Wow.
like I said, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and I just it was just,
COVID was your turning point, your
yes,
catalyst. Wow.
definitely, definitely.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. But I mean, like, amazing how your life can, how our lives can change on a thought.
Yeah,
Once you
yeah.
have a correct, let's say a correct or healthy thought or an empowering thought that stuck with you strong enough to get you out of it. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think too, it's like it's remembering that just because you haven't arrived at some epiphany yet or understanding, because I even see this in business when you're like working on a problem, you know what I mean? And it's like I can think it to death, and then 5 days later in the shower, like it'll all come together. I think it's like it's remembering that things don't always look like they're working, but they are working. Like the destruction of the acorn is not a particular tragedy to the oak tree, but it's a total tragedy to the acorn. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like the caterpillar turning to goo or whatever before it reconstitutes itself as a butterfly. It's like, well, it's actually not a super fun process to turn to goo, but it's an incredible
Yeah.
process what comes out of it. And I think it was like that. I look on that and I'm like, okay, things were working. And I am so, I mean, I do feel like one of the things that I'm proudest of myself, like even at my worst of being addicted, being homeless, after I was
Mhm.
sexually assaulted, all these things, is that like I always kind of remained open to people. And I would always, it's like every moment I was going to give up, it's like somebody would come along or something would happen. And I know in people's lives that that does not happen for everyone. And it's like by the grace of God that that happened to me. Like there was this moment where like I was just so done. I mean, I was suicidal. I was whatever. And I
Mm.
met this guy and I read him a couple of my poems and he gave me $200. He's like, this is your first payment for these poems. You know what I mean? And it was like,
Wow.
it was just like an
Wow.
angel coming along to me. You know what I mean? Or I
Yes.
would just meet somebody and they would touch me in some way or do something I don't know, it wasn't always like even something to me, but I would just see somebody and in some way, or like my Uber driver would share a story about being a meditation enthusiast for 20 years. And I would so I think it's kind of like there are bad experiences and bad people in the world and malevolent people who don't always mean us well, but there are also truly like everyday
Oh,
angels and
yeah.
truly, and I think that that for me is what kind of kept me going. And then I'm very lucky too because I mean the support of my friends and family, I mean that's although
Yeah.
I didn't have that all along the way, like it's been a learning journey for all of us, I think. um and I know there's certainly things they would have done very differently, and many things I obviously would have done differently. But I think that's something that I'm so grateful to have that to plug back into. And even during all this, like my father who'd been out of my life for many years came back into my life like in a totally different way, like
Hmm.
with this incredible apology, and just it's
Wow.
so there were
That's
so I'm
super
so
healing.
grateful. Extremely. And I
So
think
healing. Wow.
I think so much of what we need to create for addiction, right? Because we have such a culture, like part of what started to happen for me was like you start using drugs and like your world shrinks because you can't use drugs around anybody, right? And it's like you become isolated very fast. But the thing about it, like being addicted to drugs, is like addiction is continued use of a substance despite negative consequences. So the thing addicts are very good at is withstanding negative consequences. So
Yeah.
giving people more negative consequences, it's like in some ways that's the thing that was the easiest for me to deal with, right? It's like you're not going to help me, you're going to do this, like screw you, I'll figure it out, right? And I think what actually heals addiction, which is what actually heals trauma, is connection.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not saying don't have boundaries with people. I'm certainly not saying anybody needed to give me money to go buy drugs or let me stay in their house. I'm not saying any of that, but I'm saying there's because I still have, friends who are addicted and things like that. And it's so important to me that I don't cut them out. Now, there's a certain way those relationships go, and there are certain boundaries that I have and certain things I'm not going to be around. But the thing about it is, it's like addicted people are not necessarily bad people. And there are many people who are kind of bad that do no drugs, right? But I think it's like we've got to find a way generally to stay in process with people and to stay plugged into people and to stay compassionate with people, because all
Mm-hmm.
the things that actually lift you out of that don't have to do with isolating people or shunning people. They have to do
That's
with
very true.
loving people and letting them know that they're valued. And I
Yeah.
think the thing that one of the things that my dad said to me, like in the
I'd like to
first,
ask you something too.
yeah, yeah,
Go ahead. You go ahead.
well, one of the things my dad said to me within the first like 2 weeks, I think, or something, of me being sober, which again, my dad had been absent from my life. I had this perfectionistic thing going on and this kind of earning love. He said, I don't love you because of what you do. You have nothing, you have absolutely nothing to prove. There's nothing you can do in either direction that's going to stop me from loving you or
Mm,
stop me from. And that was like the most
mm,
healing
mm.
thing, you know? And it's like, I just think we need so much more of that.
Definitely. That's beautiful. I'm happy for you. I'm curious, like with your psychic abilities and mediumistic abilities, did any of that ever enter in during your addiction or recovery, or those moments where you felt there was divine intervention, like anything on that level? Or do you feel like the drug did that shut that aspect down for you?
Yeah, I think it shut it down pretty substantially.
Okay.
Um, and I think, I think it was, yeah, I think and the drug I was addicted to was meth. And so
Oh,
it's,
oh,
so it's
wow.
very, um, I mean, it works on your mind in all kinds of ways, but I think the reason that
Yeah.
I wanted to use it and the reason that I was so drawn to it was because it cut me off from that emotional center and all the stuff I didn't want to feel. But the thing about that is that center is your power, and you can't. It's like you can't. You need your mind, you need your body, you need your emotional system, you need your spiritual system. But that spiritual system, that emotional system, was like absolutely what I wanted to cut off. The beauty of it has been coming back to it now,
Mm.
and the reason why I decided to go back into business for myself, because I had been, um, for about 3 or 4 months after when I was getting sober, I did nothing. I just got sober basically, and I was lucky enough to have the resources and the support to be able to do that. Then I got a job at a grocery store as a grocery manager, which was great. I went into thinking I was interviewing to be a part-time cashier, and started looking at my resume. And so I did that for
Mm.
5 months, and I liked that just fine. But I just started to feel like, hey, I have something to contribute to this conversation still. Hey, I miss working in marketing. I miss finding unique ways to talk about these things. And I said to my family, I said, I spent 4 or 5 years so disconnected from this inner voice that there's no way in hell I'm not going to listen to it now, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so really feeling that call to go back. Um, it's a
And are
much
you
better, I
using
mean,
it
it's a
much
much
more
better way to
now in
live.
your process? Do you find you're using it more consistently in your
Yes.
process now?
Yeah, absolutely. Like
Yeah.
I do a course in miracles every morning, which is like, one way of connecting to it. And yeah, I mean, you know the benefit of living from it. And of course, obviously I did, and totally just lost that at some point. I think just so
Mm-hmm.
much anger and resentment I had. I think, and I do think that's the importance of a lot of the work that you do, and so much of the information that's in your book. I mean, honestly, Catherine, the information that are in your books is so relevant. I mean, again, when I was creating my Mastering Your Psychic Abilities course, again, like there just wasn't this information out there in the same way. Like, I mean, I would read Opening to Channel or whatever by Sanaya Roman, and like that's a great book, and that's not a book for everyone, and that's certainly not a book that, I mean, that is a very woo woo book or whatever, and it's very esoteric, and I love that book, but it's like this is just, I think it is so important in like the work that you do and what you're teaching and what is addressed in these books, because having like skills to be able to listen to this inner voice, but also to deal with the fact, like I used to go into a shopping mall as a child, I would be so overwhelmed, I would just feel all this energy pressing on me, and I had no, I mean, I didn't know what meditation was, I didn't know, there was no EFT tapping, there were no affirmations, I mean, so it's just like I would just absorb all this energy.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the utility of like the work that you do. I mean, for me, even marketing is important, and knowing your business model is important, and figuring out how to sell is important, and understanding social media is important, and knowing how to price your program, like that's all like important stuff. And then all the mindset stuff around wealth, and it's like all very important stuff, all stuff I teach. But I still believe like the most important thing for being successful, and the most useful thing when I was at the peak of my success, is knowing how to manage your own energy, and being
Mm-hmm.
able to put more in over here, take more out over here. And two key
Mm-hmm.
components of that are regulating your emotions and knowing how to listen to your intuition. They
Yeah.
did a study that I read a few years ago in Harvard Business Review, and it said the CEOs that were uh, the most like empathetic or whatever, that had like the most empathy, but that were also able to switch between two kinds of creativity, like productive creativity and then like the more open-ended form of creativity, were the CEOs that were the most connected to their own heartbeat, meaning that they
Hmm.
could feel and listen to their own heartbeat, Whereas like in my world, I was so disconnected from my body, so totally disconnected from my body that I almost never felt my heartbeat. Why? Because that is like your early warning system to when somebody's getting annoyed, when there's a shift in the room. It's like these people were the best negotiators, they were the most successful leaders because they were the most embodied, right? Of all the leaders. So I think it just speaks to the relevance of your work and podcasts like this.
Thanks. Well, it's interesting. Before we started the recording, we also talked about leadership and that there's like a void and a lack of leaders. And wonder if you want to talk about that again, because I thought it was such a great point.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was saying like there's so many gurus and like whatever and so many coaches and consultants and all that, but it's like, are these people like, are we really becoming like the people who are going to be the next whatever movement leaders, senators, presidents? And it's like there's a deficit there. And I think that part of, and I do think like this is some of the toxicity of capitalism and some of the toxicity of success culture. Even though I'm all about making money and I'm all about more and different people making money and all of that, but I think it's like there's this kind of flawed belief at the core of that, which is that like if I get ahead, then you can't get ahead,
Right.
or that I have something to protect. Right? It's like I have this success over here and I have to protect it. And the only thing that that does is ensure that you will tear it down, right? Either by external threat or internal saboteur. Like the minute you have something to protect is the minute that you start to destroy that thing. And the minute that you think you have something to protect is the minute that you are not sourcing from, source, but rather from your own energy. Because source is unlimited, right? And there is enough to go around. But the minute you start feeling like, this is mine and I have to keep other people out, it's like the minute that that thing starts to turn and the minute that you start to tear it down at some level. And I think rather it's like then realizing like there is so much more than enough, right? And that your success is actually somebody else's success and somebody else's success is actually yours. And thus it's like sharing these things and kind of coming together and figuring out ways to mentor and figuring out ways to kind of collaborate. It just becomes absolutely so important. And I think we have to continue to think and rethink how consciousness and spirituality is infusing and informing and actually being implemented in the ideas that we have, because we're not at the end of that journey. Like we have to keep, it's like we were talking about like even when we connected, combining these two worlds, right? Well, it's like that sometimes that's just looks like in the business world, it sort of just looks like I make a lot of money and I do a lot of things that are really unethical, but then I give $20 to charity or I give 20% to charity or whatever, where it's like, okay, yeah, but the means are inherent in the ends spiritually, right? And so like what that means is like that the way that you go about something is as important as how that thing turns out. And in fact, that the way that things turns out, whatever it looks like up here, is deeply, deeply informed by the way that you went about it. So while it might be better for that business to give 20% of their profits to charity, as opposed to a previous era when they wouldn't. And in fact, maybe that charity is doing a good thing. It's not the end of the evolution of infusing consciousness into commerce and into our businesses.
Yeah, like you said, it's all about ethics, and we're sadly lacking. I mean,
yes,
it seems to me more than ever before. There's people are
yes,
just this whole movement of like people who don't want to work and don't want to put in service and want things to just manifest and be luxurious without has produced a lot of unethical bypasses. You've routinely seen ads on I made all these thousands of dollars on Amazon and I didn't even write this myself. You can too,
yes,
and stuff like this. It's just like makes my skin crawl, and
yes,
it's hard to be an ethical voice in the midst of that right now too. But I do think that culture swings and there will be the next, hopefully not too long from now, there will be a swing towards wanting that
yes.
more
And part of
authentic and
what,
ethical side.
and at the same time, it's like, it's like there's all this luxury and yet there's chronic unhappiness. Do you know what
Yeah,
I mean?
yeah.
And I
It's
think
empty.
even one of the things, I mean, I even think happiness is such a drug for us, right? It's like happiness is one state of being. It's not the only state of being, right? And in fact, it like you wouldn't want it to be. There's all kinds of other states like humor
Yeah.
and courage and bravery and striving and, you know, and even sadness and mourning and all of these things, right? And if you think about joy, joy is not just happiness, right? Joy is like the infusion of like a deep sense kind of ennui and also something kind of ineffable and something kind of transcendent. And it's like, it's a much richer feeling than just happiness. But you don't get joy from just like luxury or from just success. You get joy from the experience of living, from connecting with other people, and
Yeah,
from
from
feeling
meaningfulness.
like we're in service to
Yes.
people. And I think the
Yes.
ethical thing is so important too. I mean, this was even when I was first doing readings, this was one of my biggest things, just like some basic ethical, like, you know, kind of system for like what you're gonna, how you're gonna treat people, what you're gonna say, what you're not gonna say, what you're
Yeah.
gonna, you know, how your refunds are gonna work. Like all of these things are like so important. And I think the culture swing is totally right. I mean, I am, it's like it always used to disgust me when I would see these kind of like very scammy, gross psychics who were preying on people who were extremely needy and like clearly should not, it would be like giving them a reading every day and
Yeah,
just
telling them
kind
they're
of,
cursed and all that stuff.
yes,
And yeah.
exactly. And that's kind of a lot of what you see in marketing like
Yeah.
now as well. And it's just kind of, it's kind of icky, but I do feel like, you know, things kind of come under the light, you know, eventually. And yeah, I do feel it's like I hope that that pendulum swing back is coming soon.
Yeah, I hope so too. I was joking. It's not a very funny joke, but I was joking lately that one day we're going to be sitting in restaurants that cost $100 a meal, so someone will look you in the eye while they serve you properly.
Yes,
You know,
exactly.
because it'll be like something unique to
Such a
experience
rarity.
instead of instead of something that's normal.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but yeah, I think I mean, I sort of feel like one reason I'm still standing after all these years doing the same thing is because of that ethical backbone of it all. I just sort of
Yeah.
trust somehow that is the thing that sustains no matter the other little fluctuations.
It's like
People
the
have to
tortoise and the
trust
hare.
that they have to trust that you're real, that you'll be honest with them. And you know, when all that thing with everybody copycatting your profiles and faking who you are and soliciting. I mean, it happened to me once this year for the first time, and I had at least 20 or 25 clients right on it telling me like someone's impersonating you. This and it made me sort of happy that everybody right away knew there's no way she would do that.
Yes.
And right, they trusted me and they knew I wouldn't. And so and then they blocked and reported them for me, and they felt like they were protecting me, you know.
Yes.
And
And
that's
I
what
think,
tells you where you fit. And I've done, you know, I haven't figured out
yes.
some slick niche marketing yet, and yet people have to trust you. That's the most important baseline.
Yes. And it also has to do with it's not being condescending to your customers and it's not talking down to your customers. And I think
Yeah.
so much of what, you know, these kind of scammy things do is they, first off, they just assume people are stupid and then they
Yeah.
kind of condescend to them. And the thing is, it's like, what I mean, I think the biggest example of this would be like the Elizabeth Holmes Theranos thing. Do you know what I
I
mean?
don't
Where
remember that.
it's like the, here's this blood machine that can, you know, take a drop of blood and, you know, she raises like $1 billion or whatever, right? And now she's going to jail for 10 years.
Oh,
Um,
I don't remember that
and
one. Jeez.
again,
Wow.
it's like, yes, you can market and tell people that, like, yes, you can get some money by lying, right? And saying that you have this thing that doesn't do that does all these magical things, just like I'm going to remove this curse from you, and then your life is going to be, you know, absolutely totally fantastic. I promise you, only
Right. You'll never
199.
have to work on your issues at all. It'll, you
Yes,
know, yeah, there's a magic
but
button. Yeah.
again, I do think it tends to collapse. Do you know what I mean? And it's like people who run these Ponzi schemes or anything else. It's like, and the other thing about that is living a life with that is actually no, like you really wouldn't wish it on anyone. Do you know what I
No,
mean? It's like life becomes so miserable when it's based on deceit, anyways.
exactly.
As I
It's
know
just
from, you
such
know,
dark
being addicted
energy.
to drugs and all of that, right? Which is a constant like trying to act like everything is fine and normal when it isn't, which is I don't know. I think Anne Morrow Lindbergh said, being insincere is one of the most exhausting things in life.
Yeah. 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 So in closing, how would you best define a conscious entrepreneur then for people?
So to me, a conscious entrepreneur is someone who wants to make money but also help people, you know. And I think it's someone who's thinking about the ethical side of business, right? And doing things on purpose and with intention. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I think. And I think, I look at what I hope, and if you read the last chapter of my book, I hope it's the first like kind of chapter of what the next part of my business is about. But you see that I talk a lot about business as a force for social good, right? And that's a constant process of evolution. And I think that process of evolution, like evolution is going to happen one way or another, right? But the thing about it is, and like for example, the acorn is not conscious in its evolution, right? But we are. And so we can either continue to kind of go with that through intuition, through connection to our purpose, through, rethinking and journaling and writing and introspecting and exploring these things. Like we can be conscious about it, or we can be unconscious about it, right? And one of those ways is creative. Now, it doesn't mean there's no pain in that, because sometimes there's a very sharp pain to self-discovery, right? But the other way is totally destructive. But it's like if we don't figure out a way to change, like it's not like things won't change. So, I'm all about being as conscious as you can and as aware and engaged with your own evolution. I think, and that's been my personal journey as well. Like that's the only real difference between being addicted to drugs for me and not being addicted to drugs is that one of them is a conscious engagement with the process
Mm.
of evolution, and the other one is a kind of kicking my feet and shaking my fist at the universe and
Mm.
saying, no, I'm going to freeze myself and stay right where I am, which in fact you don't anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And how can we reach you? So if you can tell us what platforms you're on or what's the best way to reach
Yes.
you.
You can on Facebook. You could join my Facebook group. You type in Conscious Wealth Creators. I do post stuff in there. I'm going to post more stuff in there. Do some trainings. You can find me on TikTok. It's at M Foundation. And then you can go, if you'd like to have a free 30-minute business breakthrough session with me, explore working together, you can go to coachwithmichaelmapes.com.
Sounds great. Well, I'm really happy to see the comeback, and I'm really happy. I think you're looking amazing to me. I can see the transformation, and I'm happy. I'm proud of you too. I'm just, yeah.
Thank you. I'm so happy to
I
be
That's
in
the
your world.
motherly side of me. I can't help it.
Well, I have that Cancer energy too, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
I've got that
Two
mom energy.
cancers together. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, it's been
Cool.
such a pleasure, Michael. We'll have to have you back another time, and there's certainly lots to talk about. Always will be.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right.